Around. Hi, hello everybody. I'm John Higgins. Here in the picture looking at Tim Johns on the left with the characteristic Tim Johns grin, showing off one of his pieces of software to Randolph Quirk back in 1982. When I heard about this conference, I was delighted to think of, DDL was still going strong, because I've been retired for 17 years. I haven't looked at an academic journal or attended a conference in all that time. So I was happy to come and see what's happened to the child, I think we could say, of Tim Johns. And if Tim Johns is the father of DDL, I think I'm the uncle. And for those who don't know, this is basically how it happens. Tim and I first met in Birmingham in 1971, when we were both shortlisted candidates for the job that he got. Deservedly. He was the better candidate. I will always agree to that. Then I went off to join the British Council. For 9 years I worked in Turkey, Thailand, Egypt. And then we met again in 1980, when he was presenting some material, some software he'd written in Colchester, at a CELMUS conference. I can't remember what CELMUS stands for. Does it still exist?
Yeah, it's turned into Barney.
Barley. Anyway, he was showing off Jumbler and Masker, and these things were fabulous. These programs are quite unlike anything else that was being done with computers at the time. All text jumbling or text mutilating and reconstruction programs. Well, I was then the bloke in the British Council who automatically got any correspondence about computers, because I was on a committee that was going to computerise the library catalogues. So that was what got me the good luck of getting sent to that conference and actually meeting Tim. And he was inspiring. And I just started to teach myself a little bit of basic. So I started playing around with these programs of his, making little similar things of my own. And then we actually, a group of us got together, Chris Jones, Chris Harrison, my wife, and myself, all doing these things. And for a lot of these ideas, we weren't getting computer programs where the computer taught the student. We were rather getting almost the reverse, programs where the student taught the computer. And there's a bit of the DDL origins right there. And in 1982, we put together this rather scruffy publication, which I dug out of my shelves, containing probably the first two papers that Tim wrote in this area, along with a few others. We called it Computers and ALT, British Council Inputs 1982. And then, yeah, there it is. And then we were asked by Annette Capel to write a book for Collins. And there it was. It came out in 1984. And there wasn't very much about concordance work in the book. There's one chapter. And it's actually, unfortunately, called The Computer Outside the Classroom. However, that quickly changed. And in 1984, I went off to the British Council to Yugoslavia, and Tim then did all the major work on developing concordance work in the classroom and DDL. He was putting the computer right back into the classroom. And a very early principle that he expressed in those days, a very important one I think, is that first of all, the language that students use should be text, not sentences. Now, those are the days where the biggest selling books of the time were Eckersley's Essential English and Stannard Allen Living English Structure. And what sold them, and this I think claimed to be the biggest selling textbook of all time, along with Agatha Christie and the Bible. Millions and millions of it. So you can still get it on eBay for about £2.80, I think. But what sold it was the fact that the exercises consisted of dozens and dozens of sentences. Possibly 75 sentences in this exercise. Where are we? 20 here. But basically, teachers didn't have to do any work. They didn't have to think up their own examples. There were so many examples of the structure, the sentence pattern here, that teachers could just take 10, 15 minutes on an activity without having to do anything original themselves. But Tim's idea, he hated that. He thought, the notion of putting language that was so artificial in front of students was not helping them to deal with real language. He wanted text to be coherent, authentic. He wanted to be the things that the students were learning English for. And you had to get rid of the notion, he said, that to understand anything, you had to understand everything. That's the principle behind simplified English. He said, no, take the preparation away from beforehand, where you're simplifying everything down so the student can understand everything, and put it into the classroom, help them to understand what's there in the classroom. So he didn't like controlled language, simplified stuff. He wanted to... and a very interesting point he made is that sometimes real language that crops up in concordance searches is much more striking and vivid than the artificial Son and Allen language. And this was his favourite example, a search for "so wildcard that." He had so many friends in high places that he thought he was safe. He said every student who sees that, oh, I know who that's about. And of course they all had different people in mind. I suppose we know all that Jeremy Thorpe. So there we are. So that was his favourite example of how one can find gems in searching authentic language that just didn't turn up in textbooks. But the real birth, I think, of TDL comes in a paper that came out in this collection here. A paper he wrote for ELT Documents, which is the magazine I was editing at the journal I was editing at the time. And it was this. A refinement of CAI, that's what we called it in those days, computer aided instruction, which we should like to look into, is a blurring of the distinction between the research program and teaching learning program. What I have in mind here is an interactive program which will give the language learner a user-friendly tool for investigating problems in the target language. For example, the use in context of a problem word or the vocabulary of a certain type of text. So there it is. The source, the wellspring, the little stream that turned into a river and has now become a broad estuary that I'm looking at here. DDL was born right there in 1980. As Tim often said, research is too important to be left to researchers. And it's too much fun. The students should be doing it themselves. Of course, he was, in a way, several years ahead of his time. Back in 1980, 1981, the only computers, well, first of all, students never had much time on mainframe terminals. They could possibly get it for special reasons, but it wasn't the usual. So the only personal computers around were something called the Commodore PET. Maybe a few people remember that one. The Tandy TRS-80, the Sinclair ZX-80, I had one of those. And for the wealthier, the Apple II. That was well before the Apple Mac. Memory was limited. There was no networking. The largest corpus you could probably store in any of these machines would be maybe 50,000, 70,000 words, which was, I think, what the Longman mini concordancer was. And even that, though, would supply quite a lot of context for little grammar words, though, more, get, put. You would get quite a lot out of 70,000 words with them. And then mostly it was, then you got machines that would store a corpus on a floppy disk, which would contain maybe 100,000 words, or, goodness me, on a CD-ROM. Ooh, what a CD-ROM. This, by the way, is the very first one that was ever given away free as a magazine cover disc. And it actually has quite a lot of nice data on it. If anyone's setting up a museum of data, let me know, because I'll be very happy to give this to a good home. So, and then I even had one, I once owned a CD-ROM which contained the Brown corpus, the Lob corpus, the Colhap, all on one. Wow. But the searches were a bit slow, and waiting for the printout could take a little time. Tim often used to say that that quick concordances were a kind of halfway house between the weeded flower beds and the cut lawns, which were the grammar books and the simplified readers, and the jungle that was real language out there, the language. The quick concordance was a sort of neat, a stepping stone halfway. And with that in mind particularly, he produced a lovely program called Contexts, which I would love to see a Windows version of. It never got converted to Windows as far as I know. I love that program. But a very enterprising Polish gentleman with the name Wiktoria Kupczyka, I can't pronounce it properly, has actually done it. He's produced a version of Context that runs under Windows after a fashion. It's a DOS emulator program. And so he's actually got Context 1, Context 2. This is, sorry, it doesn't come up very clearly there. But what the program does is he's taken a huge number of words, classified in different ways. This one, I think, is the adverbs. So again, ago, away, etc., once. A whole lot of adverbs. For each of those words individually, there are 10 contexts, 10 selections from a concordance search that he's put in. And you can either simply look at the word in context and work out what you think is happening there, what are the special friends of that word, what are the typical structures it comes in. Or you can have a quiz where he's randomly selected one of the words and blanked it out, and you have to guess, picking up one context at a time until you've got enough to guess. So it's not very easy to see there, I'm afraid. But it's well worth having a look at the program. It's worth having a look at the program. There's the URL for it. Context and Context 2. Context 2 is simply a more extended version. Unfortunately, because it's a DOS emulator, it needs a keyboard, so it won't work on a tablet or a phone, but it will work on any standard. Tim's publication output was fairly modest. I think he did around 8 papers and half a book. And even the book, when it was published, one of Tim's colleagues in Birmingham came up to me and said, "How did you get a book out of Tim? We've been trying for years." And in fact, there's a caricature of the university professor who's so busy doing research work and writing papers and research grant applications, they never have time to teach anyone. Or anything. Tim was the reverse of that, of course. He was so busy sharing with students and colleagues that he never got time to write anything up. And in fact, when we did the book, the answer to the question, how did you get a book out of Tim, was we kidnapped him. We took him out of the university for 3 weeks to over a Christmas vacation and set him down. And I sat in one room, he sat in the other. We spent the mornings drafting a section, met at lunch, exchanged what we'd done, talked about it, went back, revised, did another section. And in the course of 3 weeks, we got about 2/3 of the book done that way. And it was the only way. He had to be forcibly removed from his habit, the sea he swam in, the discussions with students and everything. And I think this particularly comes over in the Kibitzer pages. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're always worth looking at. These are records of chats that Tim had with students where he'd correct you. He was looking at some written work. A problem had come up. And he says, if you don't think you say it that way, let's find out. Let's get some concordance printout. And all sorts of things. Incessant versus steadfast. I can't remember exactly. So you'll find out the student had written incessant. That wasn't quite right. They looked for the appropriate context, and then a correction was suggested. So there's about 30 of those in that website, which is one maintained by Mike Scott. And there's a few more, which are at another website, one Li Sheng, who was one of Tim's PhD students in Hong Kong. And they are very well worth looking at. Tim described himself as a kidult. That is, a mixture of kid, child and adult. Someone who does things that may seem a bit childish, and he certainly does them with childish enthusiasm. And he included me in that description. I'm proud to be a lover kid out with Tim. And I'm also very conscious of my very good fortune in having met him and worked with him for a number of years. He was a great guy. Thanks.